Well, thank you very much. Thanks for the kind words. I always used to like to say that when someone introduces me with such kind words, I wish two of the women in my life could have been here to hear it, my wife and my late mother. My late mother, being a Jewish mother, would believe every kind, wonderful word both you and Danny Ayalon said about me, and my wife would wonder who the heck you were talking about. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to participate 2 days in a row. I think the Jerusalem conference is wonderful, and my friend Stanley Treitel invited me to come, and Stanley deserves applause. I really wanted to. Last year I spoke with you from Washington, and it's better to be in Israel in person, always better to be in Israel in person. I am delighted to be on a panel with such distinguished guests. It's really a great honor for me. As was said, we're talking about the future of U.S.-Israel relations. There's so much bickering and fighting and partisanship on Capitol Hill in Washington. Whether it's health care or the economy or you name it, there's no agreement. One party is here, one party is there, and there isn't much agreement. If you want to really look at a bipartisan issue on Capitol Hill, it would be the U.S.-Israel relationship. And so I'm really here to say, I said this yesterday, but I wanted to open today by saying that I'm here to report that support for Israel in the U.S. Congress and Senate is very strong, and it's bipartisan, and that's the way it should be. When you look at the future of the relationship between Israel and the United States, it's really what the relationship has been for the past 62 years. The U.S. was the first country to recognize the State of Israel, by the way, as a Jewish state, and it's important that we emphasize that. And the United States has been Israel's partner throughout. And I look at the relationship between Israel and the United States almost as a marriage. Look at your own marriages. I'm sure everybody here is happily married. And if you're not, we won't tell anybody. But this May, I'm going to be celebrating my 30th anniversary with my wife. And I would lie to you if I told you we didn't have some disagreements from time to time. And that's how I view the U.S.-Israel relationship. It's a bond. It's an unbreakable bond. There'll be disagreements from time to time. There'll be differences in strategy or on individual issues, as Danny mentioned. But the overall relationship is strong and will continue to be strong. When President Obama spoke in Cairo, at the Cairo speech, there were lots of things people said, well, he didn't say this and he didn't do that, and you can pick the speech apart. But the thing that I emphasized from that speech, it was really remarkable. You had an American president who was going into what is arguably the most important Arab capital, and he used the words, and this is a quote, "The bond between Israel and the United States is unbreakable." That's what he said. And so I think that's true. I think the bond is unbreakable. And what we need to continue to do, as we've done in the past, no matter who's president of the United States, or who's prime minister of Israel, or who's in the Congress, or what party's in control, or in the Knesset, doesn't matter. Because those are internal politics. What we need to ensure, and we have and we will in the future, is that the U.S.-Israel relationship is strong. Presidents come and go. I said this yesterday. Prime ministers come and go. Members of Knesset, members of Congress come and go. And I don't want to go so fast. I said that yesterday. But the relationship between the U.S. and Israel is strong. And that, the foundation, is very, very strong. You have people from the right and the left and the center and all over sharing an understanding of why it's important for the U.S. and Israel to work together. It doesn't mean that I agree with everything that everyone in my party does or says, or what the other party does or says. And those of you that know me know I never play politics where Israel is concerned. If there's a Democratic president, and I'm a Democrat, who says the wrong thing, I say it publicly. I correct it publicly. And if there's a Republican president who does the right thing, I say it. I disagreed with George W. Bush on almost every domestic policy he took. But when it came to the state of Israel, he was a strong supporter of Israel. And I said that publicly, time and time and time again. And when President Obama, whom I believe is a strong supporter of Israel, spoke about settlements, I thought that was wrong to pressure Israel on settlements when we're not simultaneously pressing the Palestinians on incitement or all the other things that they do. That's a mistake, I think. But the bottom line is, what has the administration done with Israel? You know, we are very, very concerned with Israel maintaining its qualitative military edge vis-a-vis the Arabs. You know, there was a lot of weaponry sold to Saudi Arabia and some of the Arab countries in the last year of the Bush administration because we were concerned about checking Iran. But at the same time, if we're going to give or sell advanced weaponry to the Arabs to protect them against Iran, we've got to make sure that we're also shoring up Israel and giving Israel the arms that it needs, the protection that it needs, the missile systems that it needs. And there are a lot of negotiations and discussion. I don't think I'm telling tales out of school right now between the Obama administration and the government of Israel, where the United States is making sure that Israel maintains its qualitative military edge. And the bottom line is, that's what's really important, and I commend President Obama for doing that. We need to make sure that Israel has the advanced weaponry, and we are doing that. And that is what partnership is all about. That is what the partnership between the U.S. and Israel is all about. And if there are policies that are wrong, and I think that the government of the United States is doing something wrong, you know, those of you who know me, I never ever hesitate in my 22 years in Congress to speak out. When I came to Congress, I said that one of my most important issues, if not the most important issue for me, was the relationship between the U.S. and Israel, and that I would do everything in my power to strengthen that relationship and make sure that that relationship is strong. And that's why we have a Congress that is supportive of Israel. There are shared values between our two countries. You needn't look very far if we're talking about democracy. There's only one in the Middle East, only one. There was only one 50 years ago, there was only one 60 years ago, and there's only one now. And we're in it right now. So I look at the future of the relationship between the U.S. and Israel just the way I look at the relationship with the U.S. and Israel today. We are going to continue to leave no stone unturned to make sure Israel gets whatever it needs to protect itself. We're going to leave no stone unturned in telling the world that we support the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state. I say it wherever I go because that is very important. And we're going to also continue to tell everyone around the world that any kind of campaign in the United Nations or in any kind of forum to delegitimize the state of Israel will not be tolerated by the United States. And we will say, and even though I'm from New York, and you know, we always talk about the United Nations being good for the New York City economy, and so on and so forth. The United Nations right now is a hotbed of hypocrisy. That's what it is. You have a nation, United Nations, where the majority of countries are undemocratic, and they're trying to put together a democracy made up of undemocratic states. And the nerve and the gall, and as we would say in New York, the chutzpah, of them to point a finger at Israel. You know, there's only one conflict in the world that is funded by the United Nations all on one side, and that is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There are 3 separate committees in the United Nations, all one-sided, all pro-Palestinian, all funded by votes each and every year by the UN General Assembly. The so-called Committee to Monitor Israeli Human Rights Abuses. Can you imagine that? We also call that chutzpah too. The Committee for the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, and a committee within the Secretariat. If the UN is to have any kind of credibility, then it needs to be balanced, not have a kangaroo court against the state of Israel. So let me conclude, and I'll be happy to answer questions by saying, when it comes to the UN, when it comes to any world forum, when it comes to speaking out, the United States will always stand with the people of Israel. Am Yisrael Chai. Thank you.